You are sitting across from someone in a crowded coffee shop. Perhaps it is a first date that feels slightly off, or a meeting with a manager who smiles too much, and you get this sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach that you are watching a performance rather than meeting a human being. The air between you feels thick with unsaid words, and while their mouth is moving and making all the right sounds, their eyes are scanning the room like an animal looking for an exit, or maybe just a mirror. It is that uniquely modern type of exhaustion where you spend an hour talking to someone and walk away feeling lonelier than when you arrived because you realized about 20 minutes in that you weren't actually talking to them. You were talking to their representative, their public relations agent, the carefully curated avatar they built to survive the day. We walk around constantly bumping into these hardened shells, mistaking the armor for the person inside, and then we wonder why we feel so disconnected, why our relationships feel brittle, and why we are constantly surprised when people snap or ghost us or break down. We spend our lives reacting to the surface, getting angry at the defense mechanism instead of seeing the wound it was built to protect, effectively trying to read a book by staring at the dust jacket and guessing the plot. But what if you could stop guessing? What if you could look past that polished veneer and see the raw, messy, beautiful wiring underneath in the first 30 seconds of a conversation, not to manipulate them, but simply to finally, truly connect? Chapter 1. The Face Before the Mask. The greatest mistake we make when trying to read people is assuming that the personality they present to the world is a conscious choice, when in reality, it is almost always a survival reflex born from 1,000 tiny moments of past rejection. Think about the person in your life who is painfully, aggressively arrogant, the one who interrupts every story to tell a better one, who dominates the room with a volume that makes you want to shrink into the floorboards. Your instinct is to label them a narcissist or a jerk, to roll your eyes and put up a wall of your own. But if you pause that reaction and look closer, you might notice the way their eyes dart around the room immediately after they speak, desperate for validation, terrified of the silence where their own inadequacy might live. This isn't confidence you are seeing. It is a frantic, high-stakes cover-up operation designed to hide a small, trembling child who learned long ago that unless they are the biggest thing in the room, they do not matter at all. When you understand that arrogance is just fear wearing a heavy coat, the dynamic shifts instantly. And suddenly, you aren't fighting a bully. You are witnessing a tragedy. And your annoyance dissolves into a strange, quiet kind of compassion. This shift in perspective is the foundation of true understanding, requiring you to ignore the headline and read the subtext, to stop listening to the loud, clunky words people use and start listening to the frequency underneath them. Most of us are walking around with a face before the mask, the raw self that exists for exactly 3 seconds before we realize we are being watched and the performance kicks in. You can catch it, if you are fast enough, in that micro moment when someone walks into a room before they spot a friend, or that split second after a Zoom call ends but the camera is still on, where the smile drops like a stone and the shoulders slump under the weight of existence. That is the real data, the only data that actually matters. Learning to see this doesn't mean you have to call them out on it or play therapist. It just means you stop taking their defenses personally. When your partner snaps at you about the dishes and you can see the panic of a chaotic workday behind their eyes, you realize the anger isn't about the plates. It is about a desperate need for order in a world that feels like it is spinning out of control. Once you start seeing the mechanism instead of the result, the world becomes less hostile and far more intelligible, because you realize that everyone is just trying to protect a soft spot they are convinced will get them hurt. The cold coworker is actually shy and overwhelmed. The clingy friend is terrified of abandonment. The strict parent is paralyzed by the thought of their child failing. You stop engaging with the mask and start speaking to the person hiding behind it, and the difference in your interactions is immediate and visceral. You become the safest person in the room because you are the only one not fighting their armor, and that safety is the key that unlocks the door. But to keep that door open, you have to know what happens when the script fails, when the mask slips and the glitch happens, revealing the uncomfortable truth that society tells us to ignore. Chapter 2. The Glitch in the Script. We are all walking around with a script in our heads, a carefully rehearsed dialogue of who we think we should be, but the human body is a terrible liar, and eventually, the biology betrays the biography. You have seen this happen 100 times, even if you didn't have the language for it. That split second when the audio doesn't match the video, like a poorly dubbed movie where the words say, "I am completely fine with this decision." But the hand is gripping the coffee cup so hard, the knuckles have turned white. These are the glitches in the script, the leaks in the pressurized vessel of the persona, and they are the single most reliable indicators of what is actually happening inside another person's mind. It isn't about becoming a human lie detector or analyzing micro-expressions like an FBI agent. It is about tuning into the dissonance, the subtle vibration in the room that tells you there is a war going on between what this person feels and what they think they are allowed to show. The most common glitch is the smile that never quite reaches the eyes, that frozen, polite grimace that people wear like a shield at networking events or family dinners, signaling not happiness, but a desperate, white-knuckled attempt to keep the peace. When you witness a glitch, a stutter in a confident speech, a sudden flush of the neck, a laugh that is just a decibel too loud, your instinct might be to look away to save them the embarrassment, or, conversely, to pounce on the weakness to win the argument. But the master of human behavior does neither. Instead, you simply note the glitch as a flag on the map, a signpost saying, "Here be dragons," marking the exact spot where this person feels unsafe, threatened, or fraudulent. If you ask a colleague about a project and they suddenly start over-explaining, flooding you with unnecessary details while avoiding eye contact, they aren't just boring you, they are signaling that they feel exposed and are trying to build a wall of words to hide behind. Understanding this transforms your frustration into curiosity, because you realize that the glitch is not an error, it is a confession. It is the moment the true self is screaming for help from behind the curtain, and once you hear that cry, you can't go back to pretending the performance is real. You start to see that the cracks in the armor are actually where the light gets in, revealing the ancient machinery that drives these reactions, leading us inevitably backward in time to where the script was written in the first place. Chapter 3. The Echo of Childhood. If you scratch the surface of almost any adult interaction, you will find a child's coping mechanism desperately trying to navigate a grown-up world. It is a jarring realization that the terrifying executive shouting across the boardroom table is, energetically speaking, exactly the same as a 3-year-old throwing a toy because they feel unheard and powerless. Only now they have a title and a salary to legitimize the tantrum. We tend to view adults as finished products, fixed and logical entities who make decisions based on data and reason. But in moments of high stress or vulnerability, we all regress to the strategies that kept us safe when we were small. The partner who shuts down and goes completely silent during an argument isn't necessarily trying to manipulate you. They are likely reenacting the strategy of a 7-year-old who learned that the only way to survive a volatile household was to become invisible. When you look at people through this lens, the maliciousness drains out of their actions, replaced by a tragic sort of clarity that changes everything about how you respond to them. You stop taking the bait because you realize you aren't fighting a peer. You are dealing with an echo. The friend who constantly seeks reassurance, asking if you are mad at them every time you take an hour to text back, is replaying the anxiety of a chaotic attachment where love was inconsistent or conditional. If you react to their annoyance with your own annoyance, you are just confirming their oldest, deepest fear. But if you sidestep the adult logic and speak directly to the emotional need, offering a simple, calm reassurance, you dismantle the conflict instantly. It is about recognizing that we are all walking around carrying these invisible, heavy backpacks filled with old wounds and outdated maps of how the world works. When someone acts irrationally, they are usually responding to a ghost from their past, not the reality of the present moment. Seeing this doesn't mean you have to parent them or accept abuse, but it gives you the critical distance needed to remain calm amidst the storm. You see the scared child puffing up their chest to look big, and instead of feeling intimidated, you feel a profound sense of recognition, because you know you have your own child inside you, waiting to be seen. And once you acknowledge the child, you can finally start to see the machinery of how they project that internal world onto you. Chapter 4. The Projector Room. Imagine you are sitting in a movie theater, completely alone in the dark, watching a film so vivid, so terrifyingly specific, that you forget you are just staring at light thrown onto a white sheet. This is exactly what happens in the mind of almost every person you meet, only they don't realize they are the ones running the equipment. We tend to think of human interaction as a direct exchange of reality. I see you, you see me, and we talk about the objective truth between us, but that is a fantasy. In reality, most people are trapped in their own private projector rooms, taking their deepest insecurities, their darkest shames, and the traits they despise most in themselves, and blasting them at high velocity onto the faces of everyone around them. You have felt this happen, even if you couldn't name it at the time. It's that bewildering moment when someone accuses you of being selfish after you've spent 6 months exhausting yourself to help them, or when a partner accuses you of being unfaithful with absolutely zero evidence, leaving you spinning in a defensive crouch, trying to prove a negative. You walk away feeling crazy, like you missed a scene in the movie because the accusation didn't match the reality of who you are, and that is the critical realization. It wasn't about who you are, it was about what they couldn't bear to see in themselves. Psychological projection is the brain's ultimate defense mechanism, a way of taking the trash out of the internal house and dumping it on the neighbor's lawn so the living room feels clean. The human ego is incredibly fragile, and it will go to war to avoid admitting that it is flawed, lazy, cruel, or dishonest. So instead of sitting with the uncomfortable heat of, I feel incompetent at my job, a manager will unconsciously project that incompetence onto you, micromanaging every email you send, convinced that you are the one who is dropping the ball. They aren't lying to you. They are protecting themselves from a psychological collapse. When you understand this, the world shifts from a battlefield to a diagnostic lab. The things people criticize you for most viciously are almost always their own autobiographies. The friend who constantly calls you too sensitive is often the one who has hardened themselves so severely against their own pain that seeing yours feels like a threat to their survival. The parent who criticizes your lack of ambition is often mourning their own unfulfilled potential, shouting at you because they can't shout at the mirror. This insight changes the way you navigate conflict fundamentally. When someone comes at you with an accusation that feels wildly disproportionate or bizarrely specific, you stop internalizing it. You stop asking, "Am I really like that?" and start asking, "Why do they need me to be like that?" You realize you are just the screen. They are the projector, and the movie they are playing has nothing to do with you. It is a tragedy about their own unresolved shadow. This doesn't mean you tolerate abuse, but it allows you to detach from the emotional hook. You can stand there, calm and centered, watching the film play out without buying a ticket. You can hear the accusation, "You don't care about anyone but yourself," and translate it instantly into, "I am terrified that I am unlovable, and I need you to fix it." It gives you a kind of X-ray vision where you no longer feel the need to defend yourself against ghosts. You can simply step out of the beam of light, let the projection hit the wall behind you, and see the person for who they really are, scared, hiding, and desperately trying to get rid of a feeling they don't know how to hold. Chapter 5. The Sound of Withholding. There is a specific kind of silence that is louder than any scream, a vacuum in the room that sucks the oxygen out of the air until you feel like you are gasping for breath. It isn't the comfortable silence of two old friends reading on a sofa. It is a weaponized silence, a heavy, suffocating blanket thrown over a relationship to punish, control, or evade. This is the sound of withholding, and it is perhaps the most confusing and damaging dynamic in modern human behavior because it leaves no bruises and offers no transcript. You find yourself in a conversation where the other person is technically present. Their body is in the chair, but their spirit has left the building. They give you one-word answers. They say, "I'm fine," in a tone that clearly indicates the world is ending. They look through you rather than at you, and you, being a perceptive human being, start to scramble. You start overperforming, talking faster, trying to guess what you did wrong, trying to fill that terrified void with reassurance, essentially dancing for an audience that refuses to applaud. You are exhausted, not by what was said, but by the sheer caloric burn of trying to navigate a maze with the lights turned off. Withholding is the preferred strategy of the conflict avoidant, the people who learned early on that anger was dangerous and that direct needs would be met with rejection. So instead of risking the vulnerability of saying, "I am hurt by what you did," or "I need more attention," they simply withdraw. It feels safer to them. It feels like taking the high road. But in reality, it is a form of emotional starvation. By withholding their affection, their attention, or even their eye contact, they force you to become the pursuer. They make you the crazy one who is demanding and loud, while they get to remain the calm, rational victim who just wants some peace. It is a control tactic born of profound powerlessness. They don't feel they have the right or the ability to influence the relationship directly, so they go on strike. They shut down the factory until you figure out what their demands are, without them ever having to hand you a list. The tragedy of the withholder is that they are usually desperate for connection, yet their behavior guarantees isolation. They are testing you, silently screaming, "Do you care enough to come find me behind this wall?" But the wall is so high and so cold that eventually people stop trying to climb it. To understand a withholder, you have to look past the cold shoulder and see the fear of engulfment or the fear of rejection that drives it. They are terrified that if they actually engage, if they actually tell you the truth, everything will fall apart. Breaking this cycle requires you to stop playing the game. It requires you to stop chasing. Instead of frantically trying to fix the nothing that is wrong, you simply name the silence without judgment. You say, I feel a distance between us right now, and I'm going to give you some space until you're ready to close it. You hold your own ground. You refuse to be sucked into the vacuum. By doing this, you hand the responsibility for their emotions back to them. You treat them like an adult capable of communication rather than a puzzle you are obligated to solve. It is terrifying to stop chasing, to let the silence sit there between you, but it is the only way to invite them to step forward. And often, when you stop banging on the door, they finally feel safe enough to unlock it from the inside. Chapter 6. Fear dressed as arrogance. There is a particular character you will inevitably encounter in the boardroom, at the bar, or perhaps across the dinner table at a family reunion, who seems designed specifically to make you feel small. This is the person who sucks the air out of the room, the one who treats every conversation like a lecture, who interrupts your personal story to top it with a better one, and who radiates a kind of bulletproof superiority that makes you want to either shrink into the corner or fight back with everything you have. We are socially conditioned to view this behavior as a display of power, confusing volume with strength and domination with confidence. But if you could see an X-ray of their emotional skeleton, you would see that this posture is the exact opposite of strength. It is the frantic, high-stakes camouflage of a person who is terrified that they are fundamentally inadequate. True confidence is quiet because it requires no external validation to exist. It sits comfortably in silence and has nothing to prove. Arrogance, however, is loud because it is trying to drown out the internal voice that is constantly whispering, "You are a fraud," and everyone is about to find out. When you encounter this grandiose behavior, you are not seeing a person who thinks too highly of themselves. You are seeing a person who cannot bear to look at themselves at all without the distortion lens of being the best. It is a defense mechanism built on the shaky foundation of deep, corrosive shame. Somewhere along the line, usually in early childhood, this person learned a brutal lesson: that love and attention are not unconditional, but are prizes to be won through achievement, dominance, or being the smartest person in the room. They internalize the idea that if they are not extraordinary, they are invisible, or worse, worthless. So they built a towering statue of themselves to hide the frightened child underneath, and they spend every ounce of their daily energy propping that statue up, terrified that a strong wind or a simple critique from you will knock it over. Once you realize that arrogance is just fear wearing a heavy coat, your reaction to these people shifts from intimidation to a strange, distant form of pity. You stop taking their dismissiveness personally because you realize it isn't about you. It is about their desperate need to maintain their own fragile equilibrium. When they belittle your idea, they aren't attacking your intelligence. They are soothing their own anxiety by reestablishing their position in the hierarchy. This understanding is a superpower. Instead of getting locked in an ego battle that you can't win, because they are fighting for their psychological survival, you can simply sidestep the war entirely. You don't have to fix them, and you certainly don't have to submit to them, but by seeing the fear behind the sneer, you remain the only adult in the room. You can look at them not as a monster, but as someone who is tragically trapped in a prison of their own making, doomed to demand respect they can never actually feel, forever hungry for a validation that will never be enough to fill the hole in the center of their chest. Chapter 7. The Invisible Currency. Every single time two human beings interact, whether it is a deep philosophical debate at 2 a.m. or a passing nod to a cashier, there is a secret transaction taking place underneath the surface. We think we are exchanging words, information, or pleasantries, but we are actually trading in an invisible currency of emotional needs. We are constantly scanning the other person, asking silent, primal questions. Do you see me? Do I matter to you? Am I safe here? And do you respect me? The exhaustion you feel after talking to certain people comes from the fact that they are draining your account without making a deposit. They are emotional debt collectors who demand you validate their existence while offering absolutely nothing in return. Conversely, the people you love being around are the ones who instinctively know how to pay into your ledger, making you feel richer, taller, and more capable just by being in their presence. Most relationship breakdowns happen not because of what is said, but because the currency exchange has become hopelessly lopsided. Think about the friend who only calls you when their life is falling apart, dumping their chaos onto you for an hour, and then suddenly needing to go the moment you try to talk about your own day. They are using you as a regulatory device, a human pacifier to soothe their anxiety, but they are forgetting to pay the toll of reciprocity. Or consider the partner who becomes sullen and irritable when you get a promotion. On the surface, they might be saying, "Congratulations," but the subtext is a frantic attempt to hoard the currency of status, fearing that your gain is their loss. We are all walking around with these hidden deficits, starving for specific emotional nutrients. Some of us are desperate for appreciation, others for autonomy, others simply to be told that we aren't crazy. To become a master of human behavior, you must learn to identify what specific currency the person in front of you is trading in. If you are arguing with a partner who is obsessively correcting your facts, they aren't actually caring about the accuracy of the date or the time. They are trading in the currency of competence. They need to feel smart and capable to feel safe. If you keep fighting them on the facts, you are bankrupting them. But if you pause and say, "You're right, you have a better memory for details than I do," you effectively hand them a stack of the currency they are desperate for. Watch their shoulders drop. Watch the aggression drain out of their face. You haven't lost. You have simply paid the toll to lower the drawbridge so you can actually enter the castle. This isn't manipulation. It is an act of profound empathy. It is recognizing that everyone is walking around with a sign around their neck that says, "Make me feel important," or "Make me feel safe," and having the grace to acknowledge it. When you start paying people in the currency they actually value, rather than the one you think they should value, the friction disappears and you find yourself moving through the world with an ease that feels almost like magic. Chapter 8. The Open Door. Ultimately, all this analysis, the decoding of glitches, the mapping of childhood echoes, the spotting of projections, is useless if it remains an intellectual exercise. You can be the most brilliant observer of human behavior in the world, identifying every insecurity and every hidden motive with the precision of a surgeon, and still be the loneliest person in the room. The point of understanding the mechanics of the mask isn't to stand superior to others, diagnosing them from a distance like specimens in a jar. The point is to realize that you are exactly the same, and in that realization, to find the courage to open the door first. We are all waiting for someone else to lower their shield so we can lower ours, trapped in a standoff where everyone is terrified of being the first to be vulnerable. But when you understand why people are defensive, why they are arrogant, and why they withhold, you lose the luxury of being intimidated. You see the scared child, the exhausted actor, the lonely projectionist, and because you are no longer afraid of them, you have the power to change the atmosphere. This is the concept of the open door. It is the conscious decision to drop the pretense, to bypass the shallow ritual of, "I'm fine, how are you?" and to offer a moment of genuine reality. It is looking at the colleague who is snapping at everyone and, instead of snapping back, asking quietly, "It looks like you're carrying a heavy load today. Are you okay?" It is the act of admitting your own mistake before someone forces you to, proving that safety is more important than being right. When you do this, you create a vacuum of authenticity that pulls others in. You will be shocked at how quickly the masks dissolve when they realize they aren't needed. People are exhausted from performing. They are desperate for permission to stop. By being the one who refuses to play the game, by being the one who leaves the door ajar, you become a sanctuary in a world of war. You stop trying to win interactions and start trying to deepen them. And in doing so, you find that the people you thought were difficult were often just waiting for a safe place to land. Conclusion. You walk back out of that coffee shop now, into the noise and the rush of the street, but the world looks different than it did when you walked in. The crowds of strangers passing you are no longer opaque, threatening obstacles or potential judges. They are transparent vessels of human need, each one broadcasting a silent signal that you can finally hear. You see the young man shouting on his phone, and you don't feel annoyance. You feel the vibration of his panic. You see the woman with the frozen, perfect smile, and you recognize the weight of the expectations crushing her. The mystery has evaporated, replaced by a profound, grounding clarity. You realize that there are no monsters, there are no villains, and there are very few true enemies. There are only people who are hurting, people who are hiding, and people who are trying to protect the softest parts of themselves with the only tools they were given. This understanding is the antidote to the anxiety that has plagued you, the cure for that persistent feeling of imposter syndrome and social exhaustion. You don't need to perform anymore because you know that everyone else is just improvising too. You don't need to take the rejection personally because you can see the mechanism behind it. You have stepped out of the drama and into the audience, and from this vantage point, the human experience is no longer a battle to survive, but a puzzle to be solved with empathy. You have the keys now. You know how to read the script, how to spot the glitch, and most importantly, how to open the door. The only thing left to do is to decide who you want to invite in. And for the first time in a long time, you are not afraid of what will happen when they cross the threshold. You are ready to meet them, not as the person they are pretending to be, but as the person they actually are.